Hello, I'm Solazar, and this week I'm batching it because the lovely Kirillani is away in Hawaii on a spiritual retreat. And you're listening to Good Vibrations Radio, Tools for Transformation, right here on AM 540 KRXA. Now, quantum physics tells us that we're all energy vibrating at different frequencies, and in Good Vibrations Radio, we bring you information that allows you to change the vibrational frequency of your life. Good Vibrations Radio is your source for everyday alchemy, so you can take the lead in your life and turn it into gold. We're made possible through the sponsorship of Jacqueline Joy and Diamond Alignment, and Liliana Bethany and Nolan Matthew from Seventh Awakening. And our guests tonight include Neil Kramer and Lynn McGonigal. But before we talk with our guest this evening, even though Kirillani's not here, I have a very short little type of go with the flow. This month of October is a powerful month in the year. We're in the manifesting cycle of the year, which started in July. And this month is the month of clarity and wisdom. It's the month of the master teacher. Now, we started with September. That was a month of limitless possibilities and potential. And November is a month of limitless possibilities and potential. And they bookend this month of clarity and wisdom. This is the time in this year of re-energizing and transformation of self. This is the time right now to get very clear on what it is you want to bring into your life or what it is you want to let go in your life. And as we stated 2 weeks ago when we did our Rhoda show leading up to the Rhoda Fair last weekend, we said, remember, knowledge is all about learning something every day, and wisdom is about releasing something every day. And this month of October is a wonderful time to gain your wisdom. Release those things that no longer serve you, the patterns, the habits, the physical things that we've been holding on to because we get roped into our routines, we get roped into our comfort, we get roped into our familiarity as if those things give us security. And as we've learned, as we've turned the corner of this transformative millennium that we entered in 2000, or really 2001, as we've learned, those things that we trusted the most are not necessarily the most secure. When we did the quarterly preview back in August, Kirillani and I picked a card for October, and the card was a card of stress. So the card represents an individual standing on a bubble or a kind of a balloon, and they're juggling a bunch of lighted candles, and they're blowing a trumpet, and they've got 3 legs going and 4 arms going and all types of things going on. And one hand is holding a leash that's down to a little monkey that's standing there with a pointed stick, getting ready to pop the balloon. This is a powerful image for this month of clarity and wisdom, because the image really is that take a look at all the activities that you're using to fill your day, because they're probably not filling your life. And if you don't take a look at those activities that you're using to fill your day, there might be a little monkey down there getting ready to pop your balloon, so all those things you're juggling come tumbling down. We have choice. We have the responsibility of our own choice. We create our present from our past thoughts, and we create our future from our current thoughts. So now is the time. It's always now when you start creating your future, when you start releasing those things that no longer serve you, when you start making room for those things that haven't yet appeared that you're not sure about. And then you also create the thoughts moving forward to your new life. That's the thing to do. December 21st is coming, this monumental event that everybody heralded, as we know. They over-heralded as a result of the end of the Mayan calendar, the last Mayan calendar we had, as we know that was all because we threw away a lot of Mayan calendars, at least the Franciscans did, because they thought they were the books of the devil. But this is the time this year for us to really make a commitment to open ourselves up in our lives to those areas where we want to improve, be better, release, live with the joy that we're entitled to, live with the happiness that we're entitled to, and get rid of the burdens that we carry. Remember, this is not the year to be like the ancient mariner in Coleridge's poem, traveling around the world on a piece of driftwood with an albatross strapped around your neck. This is the year to truly embrace the concept of freedom, and I believe that leads us into our first guest. Neil Kramer's made a lifelong independent study of philosophy, mystical traditions, religion, and esoteric world history. He shares his path of transformation and empowerment in writings, interviews, and lectures, as well as giving one-on-one teachings and group workshops. He speaks on many fascinating subjects and is renowned for his unique blend of lucidity, empowerment, and authenticity. He travels widely with his writings and teachings, and he lives in Oregon, in the USA. And his new book, The Unfoldment, The Organic Path to Clarity, Power, and Transformation, is a spiritual toolkit that helps create a space for all those who seek to bring greater clarity, power, and transformation in their daily life. It asks questions about the world and our place in it, and it presents a unique system of personal growth and realization that's founded in first-hand experience and aimed at practical application rather than theorizing. Life is an instrument for transformation. Are you ready to transform? Neil, welcome to Good Vibrations Radio.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me along.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you for sharing what you have shared here in The Unfoldment. And we'd like to encourage people to visit your website, neilkramer.com. That's NeilKramer.com, to find out more about the variety of offerings, writings, and books that you've put forth to share a lot of your wisdom. But as we go forward why don't we start with the title of the book, The Unfoldment? What is the unfoldment?
Well, the unfoldment is a process and a realization. The process is one that we are mostly familiar with, certainly you and your audience, which is one of awakening and enlightenment and self-development. So there's certainly my take on that and how I think one should proceed on that front. The realization element of it is a conscious realization that when you focus on your own inner evolution, you align yourself with the universe's evolution, and at that point you move into a much more magical and empowered and real world in a way. So my proposition to the reader is that the universe itself is kind of doing the same thing that we are, in that it's trying to refine itself, become purer, more elegant, and introduce divinity into every element of itself. And we aid that process in our own conscious unfoldment. And when we do so, you work together with it, and it lends its power to you, and you lend your witnessing of creation to it, and it's a very powerful partnership. So that's what the book is about.
So really it's the type of thing like we say about magicians, where they want you to look at the shiny object. And if we get caught up in the shiny object of daily living without really exploring the personal growth of self, we don't get to align with the universe. But if we get to explore self as we're doing our daily living, we get to align with the universe. Is that kind of a counterpoint related to what you just shared?
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. That's a fair thing to say. And it brings to mind the idea that we tend to think of inner development as just, something to make you more confident and balanced and healthy and wholesome and whatever. But my contention is that it's actually, that is the only game in town. That is what we're here for, is to evolve in a very radical way. And the reason in my own life that I see that people are impeded is because kind of society and culture doesn't really assist that very much. It's very much, obviously, a material world, but it's also a culture that focuses on stasis and changelessness. And so even with the best will in the world, and this does affect all of us, we have a slight trepidation over change and transformation, because it means that your idea of yourself is constantly being redefined, and who you think you are is very much a moving target. And I present ideas and philosophies in the book that say that's okay, that's nothing to be afraid of. And if you can deal with the ultimate change, which is changing self and changing what you are and who you are and what you're doing, then any change becomes your friend. And the idea of anxiety related to change and, things around the corner and future and the unknown and uncertainty, all of that stuff begins to dissolve, and change becomes much more of an ally than an opponent. So it has a very immediate effect, not just philosophically, but in your real life as well, your day-to-day life on the street, as it were. It affects everything. So it's a very living philosophy. It's not just a guy sat in a tower stroking his beard. This is the philosophy. This is the philosophy that we bring into all elements of our domestic and romantic and intellectual lives everywhere. So it's the old Greek idea, in a way, that philosophy is something that we all own and we all do, and we all have a right and a privilege to take hold of it. So I'm kind of reintroducing the idea as well that philosophy is something that naturally we have an impulse for, and it's just simply a love of wisdom, and it's a vision of truth. And I think that is a discipline that's probably sorely needed in a lot of New Age communities in particular, because although there's a big heart very often when we speak to our brethren in such places, there's sometimes a lack of focus, sometimes a lack of clarity. And I think what I've tried to do is observe what's worked in my life and say, well, hey, I think this works quite well, this kind of discipline and this kind of lucidity, and see what you think of it. It's rare that I'm telling people what to do. Obviously, all we ever really do is share our journey, which is what this book is. But I think as you go about that, you come upon things that you feel the universality of them, and you think, this has been very useful to me, and I've got a funny feeling, I've got a hunch that this is also useful to many humans, and in fact has been something that's resonated throughout the millennia. So we're always digging that stuff up and, contemporizing it and putting it in modern language and trying to describe it so it fits into our current paradigm. And, this is my attempt to do that and crack some of the unhelpful cultural and social things that keep us anchored unnecessarily, and let us stretch our wings for a change and actually do something, actually create something better.
Well, that is very, very powerful, and we're going to use that just to transition to our first commercial break. We want folks to know that we're talking to Neil Kramer, author of The Unfoldment, The Organic Path to Clarity, Power, and Transformation. And you just heard a great bit about the underlying essence of the unfoldment, which is we are here to align ourselves with the universe through our own inner evolution. We align to the universal evolution, and change is the way. It's not the enemy, it's the way. And we're going to come back to more discussions with Neil Kramer and the unfoldment right here on Good Vibrations Radio on AM 540 KRXA right after this commercial break. What would it be like if people from 129 countries connected and opened their hearts? Wouldn't you like to be one of them? You can be through Diamond Alignment.
Experience all the benefits of meditation in just 6 minutes. Try it once and change your day. Try it every day and change your life.
Create your new reality today.
Welcome back. You're listening to Good Vibrations Radio on AM 540 KRXA.
And tonight we're talking with Neil Kramer, author of The Unfoldment, The Organic Path to Clarity, Power, and Transformation. And Neil, before we went to the commercial break, you were talking how change is really something we should embrace as opposed to it's our friend versus our enemy. And you even talked a lot about philosophy. It reminded me of a friend of mine who left her real estate business to get her PhD in philosophy and then commented, maybe that wasn't such a wise thing to do. And I actually think that was a very wise thing to do because it opened her up to so much more in her thoughts, and in her ability to share with others. But I wanted to ask you, really going back to change, do you think those of us who so embrace routine, who build our lives around a sense of routine, are we doing that out of fear? Our fear of change, our fear of the unknown, or are we doing that just for that underlying sense of safety?
Yes, we have routine to give us the illusion of stability and concreteness in our life. So the idea of the home, the kitchen, and the fireplace, and the loving mother, and the adoring father, and the garden, and the yard, and all the rest of it. You're making a little world for yourself where you feel that you're controlling the parameters of what changes and what doesn't change. And routine definitely makes people feel comfortable, and it keeps the ideas of death and spirituality and transcendence, safely away. And people who want to dip into that a little bit, they'll watch the History Channel or the Discovery Channel, and they'll go to church and so on. But the idea of change is usually a misconception, I think, that we're introduced to as children, which is the universe is a big, weird, cold, lifeless place, and change is just when things bump into each other and the wind blows and we're just a leaf, at the mercy of the universe, and it's random whether you live or die, whether you get cancer or don't, whether you get mugged or you live happily and just cycle around with a big smile on your face. That thinking has to change, really, because what we're really talking about is the idea that transformation is the vehicle for ascendance. And that means that change is something that is a very creative and a very intelligent force. It's not random. There's no coincidence involved. It's a highly coherent, synchronous phenomena that is very closely bound to our own will. And if you don't engage with that, then the universe will throw what it thinks is best for you at you. So the advantage of taking hold of change is to say, well, I'll direct the change and I'll flow with it. And it's not a one-way thing. It doesn't, of course, just come out of us. It's around us. We're in the environment. It's part of the ecology. At the quantum level, at the third density level, the planetary level, the galactic level, it's one huge change that is very closely related to the whole system. What we do when we become very conscious of it is we surf that wave. So instead of holding it at bay or trying to project ourselves ahead of it, we surf the crest of that wave all the time. And we get to turn left and right a little bit or go forward and backward a little bit more. And it means that you can take advantage of the power of the universe to manifest things and to attract things. And we know all the books that deal with that kind of energy. But it's a very old energy. Certainly in England, the Druids were practicing this 2,500 years ago. Very ancient energy and a very, very magical world. And the reward, aside from the psychological balance that it brings and the emotional comfort that it brings, the reward for choosing a life of transformation is that the world becomes a very deeper and more majestic place, and it takes on a high degree of vividness, as if the color is turned up. It becomes more saturated, more excellent, and the possibilities become wider. So it has a very immediate effect. And again, you can dive into this and make these changes happen very quickly, or you can do it, you can inch forward over thousands of years as, this soul incarnating over and over. And I think what people who choose consciousness and the path of spirit, what they do is they do a sort of preemptive strike, as it were, on transformation and say, okay, I get it. We have to transform. It's not an option. The universe will compel us to do it sooner or later. Maybe not in one lifetime, but maybe over many lifetimes. Far better then to direct our own artistic, spiritual life and decide what the canvas is and what our palette is and what the colors are and so on. And you become much more engaged with the creation of consciousness. And it becomes a much more fulfilling practice. And at a very basic level, quite honestly, it makes life more satisfying and less uncertain and weird. And you're not swayed by what's on the news or what the latest blockbuster movies are. That kind of stuff just recedes in importance.
Are you saying? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, the real life you realize is the one that you create. It's not something that you just pop into. It's something that you're constantly engaged with all the time, and your presence is much more significant than one might think. Again, which culture tells us the very opposite of that. Society tells us the very opposite. It says you're just a little person and just make the best of it and try and be happy. That's not the game. The game is engage deeply with it.
So it strikes me, you make a reference in the book that unfoldment brings us out to a larger world. That when we're not going through the process of unfoldment, when we're not going through that process of self-evolution, we're engaged in the smaller world. So taking off what you just said, where you said we don't have to get tied up in the daily news, it struck me that what that means is that sometimes we get so engaged in what the news cycle is and what that goes on as if that is life, we forget that we're supposed to be engaged in connecting with each other.
Yes, and I think that's a very important observation, that if you don't think about your own world and you don't think about your place in it and you don't contemplate the relevance of that relationship, then you tend to drift into the reality that someone else is creating, like the reality that BBC creates or CNN creates and Madison Avenue and Wall Street. Their reality is only one very thin, suggested reality. It's not the reality. So when you get a very mature and grown-up-looking person in a nice suit with very nicely combed white hair delivering the news in somber tones, we tend to think that, well, this is important. This is the real news. This is the main stuff of the world. And that simply is not true. That's not true at all. And in fact, watching television and reading the newspapers and the magazines and going to university and school and all the rest of it gives, in my view, a very distorted view of reality. And one has to exercise a high degree of discretion and discernment and understanding to sift through that stuff and decide, well, maybe it's up to me to decide what's important and what's relevant. And it's highly unlikely that I can turn on a screen and watch a broadcast where someone else is going to tell me what's important. I don't think that's relevant anymore. And in fact, I think it's done a lot of damage to Britain and Europe and America over the last 50 years in particular.
Well,
and I think more and more people are slowly turning the televisions off because it takes us away from what is real.
Oh, sure. Television is a tool of control. It's a tool of hypnosis. It induces trance states. I mean, I'm not saying this was necessarily some cabal of conspiracy to put it together, but we've essentially replaced activity with passive staring.
Yes.
And we allow people, I mean, we are, in effect, voluntarily allowing ourselves to go through the indoctrination of 1984 by sitting there listening to the messages come in, and then we treat the messages as if that's wisdom coming to us. It's information, but it's not wisdom. So I think that that's also an important aspect of your book, where you just mentioned, for instance, about we use education in a lot of ways, ourselves voluntarily, to dumb ourselves down, because instead of being educated, we turn it into developing a skill set or get us into business. But you also, and you've spent your life, for want of a better term, self-educating yourself by being broad, which is actually the intention of the original creation of formal education. It was to teach people to think, to reason, to know about philosophy and science, so they had information in which to make better decisions. You've, in essence, done that yourself. Do you think everyone can do that themselves, however?
That's a really, really important point. I'm glad you articulated that so well. Originally, if you went to the best two universities in England 100 years ago, Oxford and Cambridge, you would have a very healthy, broad diagnostic approach to learning and wisdom and knowledge. And you would get very involved in history and science, mysticism, philosophy, culture, everything. And you would be asked to walk through this very rich library of human endeavor. And along the way, you will realize what your strengths and interests and gravitations are. And it's a very excellent process. That stopped happening during the Second World War. That doesn't happen anymore. What happens now is it's basically vocational training for employment. That's what happens at any university anywhere. Now, you do get exceptional lecturers and teachers who go old school and refuse to give in to the idea that employment is everything, and they give knowledge the sort of preeminence. But to answer your question, absolutely, everybody has a healthy impulse to acknowledge themselves as a lifelong learner. And as you said at the top of the program, to learn something new every day is a great joy. It's very humbling as well to realize that you don't know everything. And you realize that with every passing decade, you're getting closer and clearer, and you're getting more empowered in your maturity of knowledge. Because information alone is just data. It's just pixels, words, letters, alphabets. Then it becomes knowledge, which is applied to the world. But when you apply it to your own life, your own felt experience of evolution, then it becomes wisdom. And that has to be lived into your life. You can't imbibe wisdom as though it was a magic potion from someone else. You have to formulate it for yourself. You have to apply it yourself. And everybody knows how important that is. So the wisdom of how to treat women, or how to go to, into a forest safely, or how to cook food. We all know what those things are, but the wisdom that I think is lacking at the moment is the wisdom of how to grow as a human being and what to do as a human being, because working and retiring is not what we're supposed to do. That's not really the game. And let's say I've met 10,000 people in the last 40 years. I'd say 5 of them were doing what they wanted to do in life, and the other, 9,995 or whatever, were not doing what they wanted to do. They were doing something they felt they had to do to put a roof over their head. Now, that thinking is coming to an end. More and more people, even very conservative and traditional type people, are realizing that the whole political and governmental paradigm, whether it's capitalist or socialist or fascist or communist or whatever, that whole routine really is a bit of a smokescreen. It doesn't work like that, and it doesn't really change anything. It's kind of just a big circle. And where you draw the line, it's on the left it's communism, on the right it's fascism, and then you have socialism and capitalism. All that whole thing is beginning to malfunction now. People don't buy it anymore. And when that occurs, what it does is it forces people to look inside for a change. So they stop externalizing their problems, thinking Romney or Obama can solve them, or your local senator or your local councillor or whatever. It stops people doing that and disowning their own problems, and they turn inside, sometimes for the first time, and you could be 50 or 70, it doesn't make any difference. But until you begin that inner journey of asking the big questions and actually doing something about it in your life, you give away your power. And in that sense, whatever befalls you, you deserve it, because if you don't take hold of that bestowal of free will and divine empowerment, in my view, then you will inevitably just gravitate into someone else's reality tunnel, and whatever theirs is, you just follow like everyone else. What people don't often realize is that the whole point of it is that you create your own path, you create your own connection to the divine, you create your own reality, your own relationships, your own beauty in your life. And that's a foreign concept to a lot of people, and it requires a lot of confidence to be able to do that. And so if nothing else, this book that I've written is my attempt to give people the confidence who might talk about it and might go to workshops and conferences and retreats and vacations and put on certain clothes and types of jewelry, but really there's a sneaky suspicion inside that they're not really making contact with the divine. I think the divine is much closer than we think, and I give endless accounts of why and how that appears in everyday life, not on some mountaintop somewhere or in a cave somewhere in Tibet, but right there in the street, in the Bronx, in Los Angeles, in Tennessee, wherever. It's right there in front of us all the time. And all that prevents us from making contact with it is a false view of reality, which is something that I actively deconstruct in this book.
An interesting thing is I'll make this comment as we go to the next commercial break. I want to remind folks we're talking to Neil Kramer, the author of The Unfoldment, The Organic Path to Clarity, Power, and Transformation. And Neil, you made a comment about, government. We're going through this election process here in the U.S., and it struck me that what we had done in the evolution of mankind over the last thousands and thousands of years, we've gone from rulers to governments. And I think what we've forgotten is that government is a service. It's not about power, and it's not about ruling. When we started with rulers, their intention was to impose their will over the land, over the subjects, over their realm. But a government really belongs to the people it serves. And the reason I say that, struck me when you were talking and you mentioned about power, and I think sometimes we forget that people are attempting to oppose power on us, which is oppressive. But through strength, which you talked about, our own strength, we get to lift people and ourselves up. So the issue is we've gotten used to those routines where we've allowed others to dictate to us, which gave them power to oppress us, and we forgot to lift ourselves up by knowing who we are and where we were going, and that allowed us to lift ourselves up so that nobody can oppress us. So those were just my thoughts coming out of what you were saying, but we're going to come back and talk to you more. This is Good Vibrations Radio with Solazar and Kirillani right here on AM 540 KRXA. And we're going to talk more with Neil Kramer, author of The Unfoldment, The Organic Path to Clarity, Power, and Transformation, right after this commercial break.
You can enjoy an evening of inspiration, personal growth, intellectual stimulation, and powerful energy for transformation at the Circle of Light. Connect with other adventurous souls seeking the expanded view outside the box. Join us at the Circle of Light on the third Friday of each month at the Unitarian Sanctuary, 490 Aguajito Road, Carmel, just off the PG Pebble Beach exit of Highway 1. Doors open at 7 p.m. General admission is $11, $9 for students and seniors. Call 484-1923 for more information.
Welcome back. You're listening to Good Vibrations Radio on AM 540 KRXA.
And this is Solazar. Just a reminder, the lovely Kirillani is on a spiritual retreat in Hawaii, and she will be there for the next several weeks. And when she comes back, as always, she brings back that wonderful open heart as well as any additional wisdom she's gained. Tonight we're talking to Neil Kramer, author of The Unfoldment, The Organic Path to Clarity, Power, and Transformation. And Neil, as we went to the commercial break, I was mentioning, based on some of the comments you made, about how we've gone from ruler to government, and very often we've allowed those with power to oppress us, and we've failed to use our own strength to lift ourselves up, and that government was really intended to be a service. And you had some comments you wanted to add into that discussion.
Yes, sure. I think that, it is very important to understand that government and politics, and particularly in Britain and America, if you're me anyway, because I come from Britain and I live in America now, but you can trace what the construction of American politics back to the origins and the creation of politics in Europe, particularly in Britain. And you can understand what it's actually for. And it's the end of monarchy, and it's the end of people saying, well, we don't want a king who just inherits it from blood, so let's do things a different way. And when you do that, you say, well, let's get the people to elect people who represent them, and it's a service, and it's essentially an administrative layer just to make sure that we can organize ourselves properly. And that's radically changed over the last few hundred years, to the extent now where we're given the impression that David Cameron and Barack Obama are the most powerful two guys in the world. And I don't think they are. I think they're very powerless men. And I would go so far as to say I also think they're very weak men, because I don't see any evidence of inner development or spiritual truth or empowering philosophy. I don't hear any talk of consciousness or ascendance or divinity in any meaningful way. And I think that, you know, in order to really cut through this and understand what's important and what's good and what's wrong, is to say, well, let's ask a very simple question. Is the governmental structure honourable? And you can't mess about with honour. We all have a sense of that straight away, and the answer to it is no. So if you realise that you live in a country with a dishonourable government, which I think is very difficult to argue against that when you scratch just a millimetre below the surface, then you have to take account of yourself as your own authority and no one else. Now, you might say, well, it's not perfect, but it's better than living in Kazakhstan, perhaps. Maybe so, but it still compels you to say, I cannot respect an authority that behaves dishonorably. Therefore, I will transfer that authority back to myself. And I think that's happening more and more in America, and people are starting to relocalize how things work, not only into the community, but back into their own homes and their own minds. And I think that process is going to turn out less and less and less voters, which I think, personally, again, a bit controversial, is a good thing. Because I have to say that any vote is a vote for one empire, the one empire, which is unchanged from Egypt to Rome to Britain to America. It's one empire. And when you vote for that empire.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. One thing I would like to add and get your take on it is when we talk about, as you just did, spirituality. Now, for me, I immediately dismiss what we recognize as organized religion. I mean, frankly, I don't want to hear somebody tell me about what a good Catholic they are, what a good Mormon they are, what a good Christian they are. I want to hear what they themselves do on a spiritual perspective, not what they believe their God is telling them to do.
Yes.
And to me, that's also a distinction sometimes in the United States, where we sometimes confuse religion with spirituality. And I think religion can get people on a spiritual path. But again, if we're following the tenets of a religion, we're allowing power to oppress us. We're not using strength to uplift ourselves.
Yeah, and again, that's another parallel to what we were saying about government, that religion, for me, is a very simple one. When I look at it, I have a very utilitarian view of Christianity or Catholicism or Islam or Judaism or anything else, and we're not singling anyone out for this, any organized religion. The question I ask is, does it work? Does it provide spiritual gnosis? Does it provide metaphysical understanding? Does it provide personal insight? And the answer is consistently no, it does not do that. So I'm not interested in the morality and the ethics. I think people know how to behave. What I'm saying is that the exoteric message of organized religion doesn't work, doesn't provide anything. It's just a way of organizing communities so they don't misbehave. We don't need to worry about that so much anymore. Not many people do that who are in their right mind. So for me, it's like it doesn't actually work, religion. It doesn't give you the things that it was supposed to do in its initial, incarnation. So that brings, once again, and I think this is all part of the big plan, on a good human level, you cannot surrogate your own development to somebody else. You cannot hand it over and wait for somebody else to pick it up and say, look, read this book, wear these clothes, say these things, do this on a Sunday, and you're okay. That doesn't work. And in the heart, everybody who does that knows that really deep down, unless they've profoundly brainwashed themselves. So you can take those things as a platform for growth. and of contact with the divine and moving into a bigger, truer world. But you certainly don't need it, and in most cases it's a hindrance rather than a help. So once more, it brings people to the understanding that we have to do it for ourselves. That's the big message of this whole decade for me, in that when you see shifts occurring in government and on the planet and on the earth, it brings your consciousness back into your own life and into your own family and into your own endeavors and pursuits and happiness and growth. And it's all about that unique individual growth.
You know, you had a wonderful quotation in the book, if you don't mind me reading from it, but it was it's on page 95, and it comes from Jim Morrison, the singer from The Doors, and it says, "How can I set free anyone who doesn't have the guts to stand up alone and declare his own freedom? I think it's a lie. People claim they want to be free. Everybody insists that freedom is what they want the most sacred and precious thing a man can possess, but that's BS. People are terrified to be set free. They hold on to their chains. They fight anyone who tries to break those chains. It's their security. How can they expect me or anyone else to set them free if they don't really want to be free?" And I think that's pretty much what you've expressed in this whole premise, as we've talked both about governments and religions and everything else, is the unfoldment is really about us freeing ourselves. It's evolving ourselves so we are truly free in the sense of knowing ourselves, being ourselves, and living self-directed. Would you agree in that summary?
It is, yeah. And the issue with people who've said it before, if Gandhi might have said it, Buddha, Christ, Jim Morrison, Frank Zappa, Bill Hicks, lots of interesting and wonderful people have said these things over time. And what I try and do is say, well, I'm saying the same thing. It's one piece of wisdom, it's one truth, and we all resonate it in our own ways. But if you read my work and listen to my stuff and get involved in my material, you'll quickly find out that I don't do BS, I don't do fakery, I'm not interested in my own ego at all. It doesn't come into it. All I'm interested in is clarity and truth. And those are the things that drive me, because I don't see a lot of it handed over. So I'm saying, well, let me try and find some of this stuff, extrapolate it, refine it, make it accessible, perhaps to people who don't necessarily have the time or inclination to go and grab it themselves, and let's examine it, because I think it's very empowering. And I think that, spirituality is kind of still a funny word for a lot of people, and, there's many different terms like metaphysics, and consciousness is the big word of the last 10 years. But what we're talking about is taking ourselves as a significant force in the universe to say, nobody has any authority over us, not even the big guy in the clouds. What he wants is for us to be our own authority. The more unique and independent and sovereign we become, the happier the Creator is. That's what he wants. That's what he wants people to make their own way out from their divine origins into the depths of the universe, into the rich, ornate, incredible tapestry of this universe, and home again. And that takes a long time. And he wants everybody to do it with total uniqueness. And the spiritual truth behind that is absolutely universal. So imagine that one group or cult or sect has the magic way and the secret words and the special routines and whatnot. It's just downright silly. That doesn't hold water anymore with any serious thinking person. So yeah, the unfoldment is to say, hey people, not only should we be doing this for ourselves, but it's actually enjoyable and it's a lot easier than you think. It requires one simple perspective shift. And that, the nature and the colour and the texture of that is different for everybody. But the principle is the same. How you look at the world changes the world. Not just the way it's perceived, but the actual thing itself changes when you change your perspective.
And that is really a powerful position for all of us to understand. What I want to go back to is something you said also about the unfoldment. Like you said, this is not a book. This book will, how can I say it, will undo some people's sacred cows, even in the metaphysical movement. This book takes certain premises and says, look, this is nice, but they're not quite right, especially when you talk about visualization. You talk about the multiple densities or dimensions. There are things in this book that really cause people to stop and think and are slightly different than what they're used to. Again, what their routine or their comfort level is. And I think that's what makes it worthwhile for everybody to read. Because now is the time, as we discussed even at the top of the show, now, of course, it's always a good time, but now is really the time that we can no longer be complacent to stay in our box. We've got to get out of our box, and the unfoldment asks us to get out of our mental box and our spiritual box. So what would be the primary point you would like people to take away from the unfoldment if you had to encapsulate it into a couple of sentences?
I would say it's a very simple thing, which is that you are your own sovereign power, and you are your own unique authority and your own creative engine in the universe. And when you recognize those things at a very deep, true, honorable, sincere level, the whole divinity, the infinite, ineffable power of the universe is right there with you. And for the first time, the universe can see you when you're doing this thing, and then it will support you for the rest of your days.
Well, I have to tell you, Neil, this has been truly wonderful, being able to talk to you about this seminal work, The Unfoldment, The Organic Path to Clarity, Power, and Transformation. But what's next for you? What's coming up on the Neil Kramer horizon?
Well, I'm always writing, I'm always speaking, there's always interviews, I do a lot of teaching as well, and people can find out about that on my website. I've got a very fascinating lecture that I'm going to be delivering in Portland on December the 15th, Saturday, December the 15th, so anybody in the region, even, Oregon, Washington State, North California, even perhaps, get along to downtown Portland and come and see my lecture, which is called Mask of the Mystic, which explores the modern relevance of mysticism and how important it is and how it's transformative it is and how fascinating it is. So, yeah, that's an immediate event coming up, and I have lots of DVDs and audiobooks and whatnot as well, which people can get to from neilkramer.com, so it's all nice and easy.
Okay.